Welcome to the Intuitive Rising podcast. I'm your host, Amy Brooks. This is a podcast that invites you to remember who you are, return to yourself, and rise into your highest and best soul self. Every week, I will be sharing inspiring conversations about topics that hold keys to your awakening. My mission as an international evidential psychic medium, Reiki practitioner, and intuitive mentor is to help you rise into who you were born to be. Enjoy the show. Hello, lovely friends. Welcome back to another episode of the Intuitive Rising podcast. I am your host, Amy Brooks. Thank you for joining me. If you are Canadian, happy Thanksgiving to you. We just had Canadian Thanksgiving over the weekend, and it was a lovely affair here. I felt so full of gratitude, just being able to be here and have family come over and, just experience that. And hosting Thanksgiving, it was everything that I had been wishing for many, many years. So I'm just so full of gratitude. And I even if you didn't just have Thanksgiving on the weekend, even if you got to wait a little while, I implore you to just kind of put yourself in that mindset, in that state of gratitude. And just this time of year especially feels really, really, it feels really important to be in a state of gratitude and flow. And, it can be something so tiny, it's just one little minor thing that you're grateful. I'm grateful I woke up today. I'm grateful that I'm breathing, anything. Just remind yourself, gratitude goes a long way. And I hope that you are experiencing many, many experiences of gratitude right now in your life, in all ways. Okay, so today we're going to talk a little bit about a topic that is near and dear to my heart, and something that I'm asked about quite often, or that happens to come forward in readings that I do, and that is spirit babies. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. Today is October 15th, the day I'm recording this. Today is Infant, Pregnancy, and Child Loss Awareness Day. And so I just want to take a moment and hold space for each and every one of you who has experienced that. They say it is 1 in 4 of us that have, and that is a figure that is just so huge. That's such a common thing. 1 in 4. Think about that. 1 in 4 people have experienced that heartache, that loss. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today, and I'm going to share some spirit stories. And this podcast is going to lean on the positive side. It's going to lean on the comforting, hopeful side when it comes to spirit babies. So if you're someone who has experienced a great loss and you want to receive that comfort, you want to be in that place of hope that that little one is and will forever be connected to you, then stay tuned and stay with this episode, because we are going to talk about and share. I'm going to share experiences, both personal and also client readings that kind of stand out into my mind at this time about, spirit babies and how they show this connection that we are always connected to. Okay, I'm ready. Okay, so firstly, I'm going to start with a little personal story. You may have heard it before. You may not have, depending on if you're new here or not. If you're new, welcome. I'm so glad that you are here and listening, and I hope that you find what you're looking for from this podcast and maybe from this episode. I personally am a part of the 1 in 4 club, a club that none of us want to be members of, but I am. And I had a loss 10 years ago, 2014. It was my first loss that I'm aware of. And I say that in the sense that one thing that I've learned, especially when connecting to spirit babies and for clients over the years, is sometimes we may experience a loss and not be aware of it, right? So it may be the case of really, really early on in the pregnancy, before there's even been a missed menstrual cycle, that we would have conceived and then very early on had that loss and assumed that was our menstrual cycle. That can happen, and happens more often than we know. But I'm going to share a little bit about that, but also I'm going to share about the losses that we are aware of, or I'm going to share in the case of a recent client reading in which I connected to a baby, an infant that had been born earthside and then passed soon after. I want you to know, if to come today with an open heart and open mind, if you are not in the space to hear stories about loss, then I kindly ask you to fast forward or enjoy another episode. I did want to let you know, as I know that this is a sensitive topic and something that someone must be ready to talk about, right? And to deal with. So, personally, I've experienced this. I had a deep sense that, early on in 2014, I would have conceived in late 2013, and then learned of the pregnancy right around the new year, 2014, and was due in September of 2014. And this was a much wished for and loved pregnancy. And I knew probably around the 9 or 10 week mark that something might not be right. And the way I knew that is because of my intuition. And at the time, I didn't feel comfortable sharing that with people, or even sharing with my medical professional, my doctor, my GP, like, hey, I feel like something's wrong because my intuition is telling me something's wrong. Or, hey, in the past, anytime I was pregnant with my previous children, I dreamt of them and I picked up on great detail about them and I had a feeling from them. And this time, nada, which makes me feel worried. Certainly didn't feel comfortable talking about that at the time. Now I would, for sure, I feel, because I'm definitely owning all of that intuitive connection. But I just had this general sense that something wasn't quite right. One thing that I was really strong on, one thing that I felt very certain of right from the get-go, was that this baby, this third baby of mine, was a boy. A very strong boy energy. With my first two children, I knew what they were right from the get-go. I knew that my daughter was a daughter, my son was a son. This time was no different. Knew this was a boy. And then very soon after conception, after I realized I was pregnant, constant in-your-face signs that I was, but also names. There was a name in particular that showed up everywhere. And now it's kind of a name that you might hear more often, because it's like those older style names are coming back. They're popular now, but 10 years ago, this name wasn't really mainstream or popular like it is now. That name is Henry. I saw the name Henry everywhere. Once a day, I either saw or heard the name Henry. Like, it was to the point where I was like, this is ridiculous. And that was really before, I always believed in spirit, but this was definitely before I was actively like working with the spirit world, that's for sure. And so I just kept seeing it. I was like, oh, this is a boy and his name is Henry. There was a personal connection, as my father, who was living at this time, he passed in 2018, but in 2014 he was living, and his middle name was Henry. So I thought, oh, nice connection. There's family connection. I like the name. I kind of like the old man names, if I'm honest. So I was like, yep, definitely can do that. And I had these kind of signs from him, but I also had this feeling that something wasn't right. And so I remember going to my GP and asking, if we could do some blood work, maybe do an ultrasound. This was a new doctor to me at the time. This was only a few months after we were posted away from Nova Scotia to Ontario, which I just returned from 11 years later. So this was the beginning of that chapter of moving away. And this was a new doctor to me. And if I'm very honest, grateful to have had a doctor, but if I'm very honest, especially in the beginning, was not a great match for me. In a few different ways, but I had, expressed a desire to investigate a little. I didn't say my intuition has been telling me something's wrong, but I did say, I just have a feeling. Could I have some blood work? Could I have an ultrasound? The answer was no, I could not. Let's wait it out. Let's wait till you're 20 weeks. And like I said, I was about 9 or 10 weeks. That feels like a long time to wait when you feel like something's not right. But I just kind of moved forward, and I told myself, no, you're being silly. Like, of course, everything's fine. Like all of the pregnancy symptoms were there. I was nauseated. I had all the symptoms. Let's just leave it at that. But I couldn't get over this feeling that something wasn't quite right. Long story short, unfortunately, I was correct. Something wasn't quite right. And I did lose Henry around the 16-week mark. And it was a devastating, traumatic experience for me. And it didn't matter that I was only 16 weeks, or that, he wasn't born, or he wasn't further along pregnancy. And because, sometimes people are like, well, at least you lost them early, like at least it wasn't like you had to deliver or any of that kind of stuff. And I'm like, it doesn't matter to me in this moment. This was my child that I wished for and hoped for and loved so much. And it doesn't matter. And I say that because I feel like so many of us may have internalized this idea that's in our society that it hopefully is dying now, but that, if you're only a few weeks along, it's not really a baby. Or it's not really a big deal. Like, get over it. It's not something to just get over. And anybody who's experienced any kind of loss, whether it's been at 5 weeks pregnant or 5 months pregnant, knows that it's something that we need to process and grieve. It's traumatic, right? So that happened, and it was such a horrendous experience. And so I say everything I say moving forward with so much love and comfort and also tact. And I just hope that, that what I say today is received well, and it provides comfort and peace. I just want to share in general that babies in the spirit world show up for me very often. If there is a baby connected to you that has been conceived or that wants to be conceived and is connected to you, they will, more often than not, come through in a reading. Recently, about a month or so ago, maybe 6 weeks ago, I did a reading for someone, and we were connecting. I feel like, it was during mediumship we were connecting. And I said, I feel the presence of a little soul come forward. And I said, this little soul is kind of giving me a timeline, or a time that a time that they would have been conceived or born, or what have you. And it was like, I feel like it was the late 80s. It might have been the early 90s, but it was like in that kind of range. And I said they're male, and their name is Michael. That's what I was hearing. And there was a part of my client who thought to herself, that feels right to me. She didn't have a known loss, meaning she didn't know she was pregnant and then miscarry, or, deliver a baby and have it pass. It wasn't like that. But she had always had a sense that there was someone, even though she didn't know she lost someone, if that makes sense. And so she said, you know what's really interesting is that years ago, I wrote a poem about my son Michael, but I don't have a son Michael, or didn't realize I had a son Michael. But I wrote a poem about having a son Michael. And she's like, how wild is that? I also brought through, the timeline that this was a child that was born before another child of theirs, and that connection they have with their living child. She shared with me that during the labor and delivery for that said child, it was a near-death kind of experience where she almost passed away, and that she had a very strong connection during that time to Archangel Michael, again with the name Michael. And then this little one in spirit that had been born before and lost, named Michael. And then she had even given her living son the middle name Michael without it being a family connection. So, all in all, kind of an interesting synchronicity, and shows this connection between souls. Even if if you've got a child connected to you in spirit, they're going to tell me about it. They're going to be like, hey, that's my mom. They're going to tell me about it. I promise you. I've also connected to babies that are wanting to come in, right? Many times I've connected to, I'm thinking of one in particular where this was early on in my career. I was doing a reading for 3 daughters and their mother. We were connecting to the father figure, right? Or the husband for the wife, the mother. And I kept looking at one of the daughters and I said, I'm really directed to you. And I said, I don't know how to interpret this other than I feel like your father is pointing at you and saying that there's a baby coming. And she kind of laughed, and it was like, she was like, I don't know where that's coming from, but that's something that I don't think you're right about that one. And I said, okay, all I can do is share what's coming through, and that's what's coming through. And maybe a couple weeks later, her partner had messaged me and they were like, so she was pregnant and didn't know it at that session. And I had brought through that there was a boy connected to her. There would be a son for her. And so anyways, they said, so you're right about the pregnancy. Let's see if you're right about the gender. And then a few months later, they're like, so it's a boy. And I was like, awesome. But I've had things like that happen many, many times as well, where the soul that's going to come to you will come in a reading, which just provides a ton of hope, especially if you're coming to the reading wanting that assurance, like, is that going to happen for me? And then it comes in without you asking for it. It's just a beautiful, beautiful thing to experience. This is another personal story. A couple years ago, I had a reading myself. I feel like this was in the summer of 2022. I booked a reading for myself, and my grandfather came through. And this is a grandfather that is often silent in readings, doesn't poke in all that often. He's not super vocal, but he came in this time, and he had been sharing some things about my grandmother, who was still living at the time. The medium had asked me, is your grandmother not doing so well? And I said, well, no, not really. But she's also, 90, she was 94 at the time. I said, so, and she said, okay, because he's saying that they're making space for her. And I said, okay. They're just holding space. They're telling, you get the sense that it's not going to be too much longer, but when you're talking about somebody that's in their mid-90s, you kind of know that, right? And then I said, who is they? You said they, not he. And she said, well, he's coming in with his son, their son. And I said, oh, they don't have a son. Because in my mind, no sons. They have 3 daughters. He doesn't have a son. And she said, oh, well, I don't want to tell you, but he said he's here with their son. And their son, he and their son are making space for her. And I thought, okay, I'm going to have an open mind. Just maybe there's a family secret coming through. I don't know what's happening, but okay, got it. And then later on, I shared that with someone in the family. And that had been revealed to them only a few years later. They went many, many, many years not knowing that their mother had experienced a loss. And a few years before my nanny passed, my nanny had shared, yep, I had had a loss between my first and my second, and it was a boy, and he had been stillborn. And that was something that I did not know, had no knowledge of, yet this medium had brought through that my grandfather and their son were making space for my nanny. And that was 70 years ago that would have happened, a long time ago. A long, maybe more than 7, like in that range though, a long time ago, and still so connected. And it brings me immense peace and comfort to know that upon my nanny's transition last May, that she would have been greeted not only by all of her loved ones in spirit and her husband in spirit, but also this little boy that she never got to meet. So yeah, that makes me want to cry. But yeah, absolutely stunningly beautiful evidence of that connection, that invisible thread, spirit baby, to us. If there's a little soul connected to you, they will always be connected to you in some way, shape, or form. I have 2 more stories for you. One involves another client, and this was about a year or 2 ago that I did this reading. And I had brought through again that I was picking up on a little boy in spirit. And this was somebody that knew that they had a loss. It wasn't like the case of the other client that didn't know but had a feeling. This was a person that knew they had a loss, but didn't know what gender or sex the baby was. They just knew, I should say sex. They didn't know what sex the baby was. They just knew that they had been pregnant. And so I said, okay, well, I'm connecting to a son. And, this is his name. And I cannot remember the name in this moment. However, I know that it was the same name that the baby's father and my client's husband, that they had the same name. And so this was instant validation of, oh my goodness, like that would be his father's name. So, even though I didn't name the baby that, it's beautiful that he's come through saying that's my name, as, if he had been born, that's probably the name he would have received. So I think that's really beautiful. And so that brought a lot of comfort. And then they had, the baby in spirit had shared that they were especially connected to their father and was especially connected to the 2 of them and keeping them safe. And I was shown an image of someone in a car and almost being in a wreck. And I said, your son in spirit is bringing forward a feeling like there has been a near miss, like someone has survived something or come out unscathed almost, when it doesn't make any sense that they survived it, or that there would not be more damage, right, to both the vehicle and themselves. And I said, he's bringing this up like that something could have happened and almost like should have happened in a roundabout way, but didn't. And that he was involved in intervening in that situation, but also keeps you very safe in all travel, especially car. And it was shared with me in that moment that her and her husband had been in that exact kind of accident where it was like head on, and it should have been something that, if not killed them, absolutely was a massive accident, should have destroyed the vehicle, should have been injuries. There was not. It was like, she said, it was like there was like an angel or something that had intervened. And we always thought that, like we always said, oh, the angels are looking out for us. I'm getting goosebumps as I say that. All along, it was their son in the spirit world. Oh, and it just, there's this connection with souls, whether we bring these little souls earthside or not, I need you to know that there will forever be a connection at the soul. If we are having children, conceiving children, losing a child, etc., that little soul will forever be connected to us at the soul level. Very likely we are soul family, right? More often than not, I bring through a feeling of like, hey, we've lived a life together before in some way, shape, or form. This is something I bring up a lot if I'm connecting about parent and child. Very often, if I'm connecting to just kind of a message about the dynamics or relationship between a living parent and a living child, very often there'll be a past life connection as well. So I just share this because I want to validate this deep, invisible string, sometimes not so invisible, right? String that connects us by soul always and forever, regardless of what happens, regardless of what happens. Lastly, I want to share a story that just kind of it's a very recent experience. I just did a reading a few days ago, actually, with a client, and this client was the spouse of another client. But the client I worked with that I'm about to talk about was new to me. I had never had a reading with me before, but like I said, I had connected to their spouse before. And this couple have a little soul in spirit. There's a little soul, a little girl who was born earthside and passed away at 4 months old of sudden infant death syndrome. And, I have connected to this little soul before for her mother, but I had never connected for her father. But her father was ready, I guess, been going through some soul transformation and was ready to hear from whomever came through, whatever came through, wanted to hear about it. And so that little soul, that little daughter, came through in a huge way, bringing through things that she had never brought through before. Like I was familiar with her because I've channeled and connected with her before for her mother, but there was all new things she brought through with her father. And there was this theme that she was bringing through for her father. Such a healing session. It was such a healing session, but there was this theme around her wanting to share with him how alike she is to him. I believe she used the words that she was like his mini, right? She was his mini me, and there was loads of evidence that she brought through where she's like, this is something that I'm like, this is something I can do, or this is something I like to do, and then it was something that her father, who is in front of me, does, right? And they were specific things, not run-of-the-mill things. And all of that was being brought forward by his daughter in spirit, to validate, hey, like, I've been following your path. We are connected as souls. We are one and the same. I'm just like you, Dad. I'm just like you. I enjoy this too. I love this too. I look like this too. Because she had kind of shared with me that she resembled, in terms of like eye color and hair color and things like that, like him. She resembled him. So it's just such a beautiful experience. And I could tell that he needed that. I could tell that that helped so much because he had this, one thing that she brought through was, and one thing that comes through with certain losses, especially losses, this is a side note and also a sensitive topic. So I'm just going to let you know it's a sensitive topic, but what we were just talking about, this little girl in spirit, this is not what I'm talking about, right? This is something else I'm going to bring in, a different situation. But I've connected many, many, many times to babies who have been lost through termination. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because when I connect to little ones who've been lost through termination, or little ones who have been lost through miscarriage, or little ones who have been lost through stillbirth or through, sudden infant death syndrome, there's always a similar message, which is, I know it doesn't make sense in this moment. It doesn't make sense to our humanness, but there's a sense of knowing that that life would not be long. There's a sense of knowing from the soul that, hey, I might be born, but I'm not going to live a long life. Or, hey, I'm not going to be born this time, but I still am part of you. Still, my conception is still part of my soul's journey, and it's a part of yours. And one day all of that will make sense. And so I just want you to know that it feels like there's an aspect when it comes to situations like that, that there's some sort of soul agreement, some sort of soul plan that I am the first to admit doesn't make sense to us as parents, as loved ones, as grandparents, as siblings of little souls that have chosen that path. But it doesn't change the outcome, which is that they are part of us and will forever be a part of us, and that we will be reunited with them, even if it's in 70 years' time, like in the case of my grandmother. And so this little girl in spirit who had lived for four months earthside and had been so connected to her parents, brought through for her father. I need you to know that this would have happened, regardless, that this was something that was going to happen. And that in itself was such validating and healing words, because this person had blamed themselves and felt guilt for not being able to save their little girl. And so for her to come through and saying, Dad, I need you to release that guilt, because it was going to happen. It was going to happen. And there's nothing that you could have done. There's nothing humanly possible you could have done ever to change that. I need you to understand that so you can stop beating yourself up for it. And then bringing up all that beautiful evidence of and this is how I still am around, and this is how I support you, and these are the things I knew. I mean, there was one thing that comes to mind. She brought up being connected to a certain sibling that had been born after her, and I said, there's just this connection. There was a connection to a tattoo, and then it was shared with me that that sibling, that living sibling that she referred to, has a tattoo with her, with his sister in spirit's birth date and death date. And so she was bringing that through as well, to validate, yeah, I know I'm still part of the family. I know you guys still talk about me. I know you think about me. I know you've raised your other children, my siblings, to know about me, right? And yeah, it was such a beautiful session. I want to share some feedback I received from that person's spouse after the session. It writes, he can't stop talking about it. What a beautiful healing experience that he had. He can't get over all of the things that came through. He said it was like hearing his whole life story unfold. Kept saying how crazy it was. Thank you so much for all you do. He's slowly coming around to realizing that there is so much more out there, and our people are always with us in spirit. And that's what it's all about. It's not about making somebody to believe something that they don't want to. It's not about forcing beliefs on anybody. It's just about showing up, being here, open, and having people show up when they're open, when they're ready, and just bringing through that information and seeing how it settles and seeing what it does. I know that was transformative for that person. I know that was life-changing for that person. I know that will forever change, kind of the landscape of life for that person, in the way that they move forward, and that they think about things like spirit and loss. And that is so fulfilling for me. But I share all these things with you because ultimately All I ever want is for other people to find peace and comfort, and just to be able to be that medium that bridges that connection and brings that connection forward for you, showing that you've always had that connection. Always, always, always. I also want to share, just lasting, because this may be comforting for people who have experienced multiple losses, and are TTCing, they're trying to conceive. They're, just in that waiting period of, oh, this is what I want so badly. There have been multiple occasions where I've connected to a spirit baby, the essence of a little one, and they have brought forward that they are returning, or that they have returned. I remember doing a live years ago. I actually think it's on YouTube, a reading where I connected to someone who had a loss and then went on to have more children later on. And this little one in spirit, that was the little soul that had been lost the first time, revealed that they had come back as one of her other children. And so they validated that by telling me which children it was. Was it the oldest, the youngest, the boy, the girl, whatever way they chose to identify, and then brought through things about that living child, right? Personality things, little quirks, little interests, experiences, birth dates, etc. That then the client, the person in front of me, was like, yeah, like, that's my son. Oh my goodness. He came back to me, or I feel like in one case, I brought through something similar to that, where a loss had then chosen to come back again to them. And they said, that's what I asked. I said, please come back to me. Please come back to me again. So, and they always had a feeling like they had come back to them. That happens very often. Those that we're connected to, very often are part of our soul family, right? And so our children, our spirit babies, they're connected to us at a soul level. We simply cannot lose them. We simply cannot lose them in that way. That invisible thread that connects us will forever connect us. I'm going to leave it there today. I hope that today brought you a little bit of comfort. I hope that hearing these kind of things made you feel a little bit more hopeful, maybe more at peace. And I urge you, if you are someone who is struggling, please reach out and talk to someone. Please share. There's so much healing in sharing. There's so much healing in sharing. So many women before us, so many parents before us. Men suffer too. Men grieve losses as well. Don't talk about it. They don't talk about it. Nobody talks about it. There's been so many times that I've connected to an elderly person in spirit, and they have brought through a loss that they had, and they just never talked about it in their life. But it weighed on them tremendously. And then to hear, like in the case of my nanny, having the ability to be reunited, I remember one reading I did where there was like a grandmother or mother figure in spirit, and like much older, and they were talking about their son. And my client in front of me was like, gentle girls, and then she went off, like similar to my case, right? Went off and asked somebody in the family that would have been more privy to that information. And they're like, yeah, actually she did have a loss. At this such and such a point, and we didn't talk about those things back then, right? And then I remember that client coming back to me and going, "Yep, it was validated. There was a loss. Oh my God, I've got a brother. I can't wait to meet him one day." Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Okay, everyone. Sending lots of love to you. I'll see you again next week. Bye. If you have enjoyed this episode, please consider hopping on over to wherever you listen to your podcast and giving it a 5-star review. Thank you so much in advance. If you'd like to keep in touch, please head over to my website, theintuitiverising.com, to keep up with all the things that I have been doing. I also have a private Facebook community for people just like you. It's called the Intuitive Rising Community. All you gotta do is request to join, and I will let you in. Keep rising.